I was in the building and it started shaking, so back and forth. It was a lot more than I was used to. And then the building starts to squeak. And I remember thinking to myself, what does it feel like to be in a building before it collapses? And is this it? I didn't know if this building could handle it. Then the next quake happened 15, 20 minutes later. So I started going down the stairs and everyone started to have white helmets, those kind of construction helmets you see at electrical sites. Yeah, everyone had one but me. The earth was still shaking, it was still rocking. And I went home and I started to write. I wrote a piece in about an hour and a half and submitted it to the New York Times.
It starts with just taking that leap.
Man, you have to work hard. You have to be incredibly smart.
Choose something that even if it fails, you are going to be proud of it.
Doesn't matter how badly you got beaten in battle.
Be kind, be kind, be kind.
Become a better person, a better leader, the better business.
Go with your gut.
I'm Samuel Donner, and this is Finding Founders. We'll get back to the podcast right after this break. Unsexy, hosted by Elaine Zelby, is brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network. From scrap metal to timber to estate planning to freight pooling, Unsexy is a meandering exploration of just how sexy overlooked industries can be. One of the recent episodes was about campsite booking and outdoor travel with Brian Nolan, co-founder and CEO of Book Outdoors. So if that sounds interesting, listen to Unsexy wherever you get your podcasts. And now, back to the podcast. Somehow, David has repeatedly found himself at the center of disaster. His most life-changing trip through Asia was during the Asian financial crisis. His first big writing opportunity was during the 2008 financial crisis, which resulted in him losing his day job. This earthquake in Japan cemented that position as a writer, and now, post-COVID, the world needs the kind of community David is building more than ever. I actually think that's something the best entrepreneurs have in common, finding opportunity in disaster. And in David's case, I think he's able to see opportunity because of the breadth of his experience. David was a resource strategist on Wall Street, oversaw natural resource programs at the White House, and even ran a water-focused NGO in Africa. His writing appears in the LA Times, the New York Times, and he's published a book under Yale University Press called The Elements of Power. While writing this book in internet cafes around the world, David experienced firsthand how working remotely requires flexibility and breathable spaces, which is why he created Outpost, designed to be a safe place for digital nomads to break away from the conventional office. But before he was writing and traveling the world, a life of adventure in his hometown of Trumbull, Connecticut had a pretty low bar. Do you remember some of your earliest memories?
I think that when I look back, it wasn't necessarily an adventurous child. I went to Baltimore with a family for trips. I went to New Hampshire during summer camp, and that was kind of the geography of my life. And it gave some comfortability. At some point, I realized that there was a whole world out there, and I wanted to see it. But that didn't happen in childhood.
What were your interests in childhood?
I started to play basketball. It helped that I kept growing.
How tall are you?
I'm 6'3", 191. Then went to a school where I was the third smallest on my basketball team.
Oh, wow.
So even though I was blessed with height, I was in a school where the height just didn't matter. I played basketball, but I sat the bench. Mm. But it was actually probably my first experience being around people who were great at something. These guys were going Division I. 7 guys from my high school team went Division I.
Wow. So you this was like a really good basketball team.
And I was really not.
Hey, but you made the team.
But I felt honored to have my shot blocked by some of the best high school basketball players in the country. It was nice to be around that. I could see what people took to be great at something.
Didn't you win though, like some kind of slam dunk competition?
Yes, I did. I did take second place in a slam dunk contest. It was about knowing the rules. Yeah. And all these other guys were trying fantastic dunks, which were beautiful, but they missed. And so if you missed, you couldn't continue on. It showed me like, wow, I guess, knowing the rules and just staying around long enough, you can achieve something. So I took second place. But no one would bet on me again back then to take second place.
Do you feel like you pursued things out like in a very like safe, controlled way in like middle school, high school?
I still think I do now. I don't know if it looks that way from the outside.
Definitely doesn't.
No, but I do things because they're interesting. But I don't do things that I think are crazy. Yeah, I like to follow ideas and see how they all come together.
Were your parents pretty risk averse as well?
They were very risk averse. My father worked in the same company for 37 years.
What was the company?
General Electric.
Very safe company.
Very safe company back then. And but he didn't climb up the ranks of General Electric, which would have entailed him traveling around more. He didn't want to do that. And so he stayed in Connecticut. They lived in the same house for all their life that I knew them. Both my mom and my dad died in the same house that I grew up in. It was just stability. Same house, same everything.
Which seems to follow that same kind of pattern of stay somewhere long, don't take too many risks, do what you are supposed to do, and things will work out. So as high school was ending, what did you see as your life path? Did it feel concrete at that time? Did it feel up in the air?
I felt everyone had a role. There was a lawyer and a doctor and an economist, and I was looking to find my role. And I think it was graduating from college. I was at Boston College for the last 2 years of university, and I was ready to be a consultant at Anderson Consulting or KPMG or whatever it was. I figured that was the career path.
That feels like the safe.
That was the route.
A well-trodden path.
It was the clear path. And someone came up from Japan to recruit people to teach English. So they came in the interview and I said, well, I'll do this. Let me check this out.
Why was that interesting to you?
Because it was something different. I wasn't well-traveled.
Yeah.
And I can go there for this program's for a year. It can be something that I experience for 12 months and come back and then go to consulting. And so when they offered me the job, I felt during the interview, once I told them, am I interested? And I said, yes, I felt like the job was mine. Sure enough, it was. My skills were, I have a very good American accent and I look the part. So I went over for Japan for a year. And after about 12 months, I was ready to leave. I had made some money. Actually, teaching English then was quite lucrative.
When you were there, what did you learn about yourself, about the world? Were there any experiences you had there where it's like, oh, wow, I am somewhere different. I don't understand this culture.
I remember the experience. I thought that a couple of things would happen. One, I was never going to date. Two, I was never going to eat beef because back then beef in Japan was so expensive. And then three, I would never, I'd never see anyone else's apartment. Everyone's, going out. And within that first night or second night I was there, I went out to a restaurant, and then we went to a bar, and the restaurant I was having beef. And then I went out to a bar, and I remember looking at a guy and he had his name on the bottle. It's like, wow, this guy must be the owner, someone really cool, not knowing that bottle keeps and having your name on bottles is somewhat common in Japan. And at 2 a.m, he brought us back to his apartment. And so within the first 2 days, not even getting over jet lag, all my expectations were shot. I didn't know what I was up for. And it was a comfortable place for me. Japan during those times, I was paid well. I worked hard and I had a lot of energy to just go out and explore.
Yeah. And
it was after the 12 months I had saved up $15,000 or $20,000, which was not too bad for
not bad at all
for saving.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I can go back home and I can get my BMW 325i and pay a down payment, or I can go travel for 3 months. And I decided to use that money to go traveling for 3 months. It turned into 7 during the Asian financial crisis, which was its own scary, sad, and eye-opening experience to be a part of as someone who could watch it.
Eye-opening in what way? What happened?
Because the currencies of the countries we're going through had collapsed by 5 or 7. So what you find is that hotel rooms that were $70 are now $10.
Wow.
And so everything got real cheap. And I didn't know what was normal, what was not. That was my perspective. The other people's perspective is everything got 7 times more expensive.
Yeah.
And that's where things got sad, because they did. Milk, formula for your child, everything, the basic needs. So to be traveling around that time and seeing the impacts was, for lack of a better word, profound.
What were the beautiful aspects of the travel?
It was challenging myself. I remember I was in a car with someone driving somewhere in Malaysia, and we were both heading towards Bali. Where we were going, and we were just chatting as 22 or 23-year-olds do about seeing new things, and just like everything was amazing. And we were talking about how, I said, I don't like heights. I'm fine with heights. I don't like falling. And so, but I was convinced to myself I was going to bungee jump.
Really?
So I was talking to her like, listen, this is about breaking down barriers.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, you're doing it. And we're talking about driving through jungles in Laos and sitting on trucks and getting, 8-hour, 30-kilometer rides because the roads were so bad. And so we came down to Bali and like, this is the time. She's there, I'm there. And we walked up, and 50 meters is quite high from the ground.
Yeah. So did you guys start traveling together?
So, but not with that particular person.
Yeah.
But I guess the short of that story is no, I didn't bungee jump. I realized, some barriers aren't meant to be crossed.
Wait, so did you get up to the? So
it got to the point, and I looked up, and it said, we don't negotiate with our price, and we don't negotiate with their safety. I'm like, that's a good slogan.
Yeah.
And then the guy said to me, don't worry about the 200,000. We'll do it for 150. And I'm like, no, keep it at 200,000 because I don't want you to negotiate with my safety. And I never did that.
Why not?
Because I don't like falling.
Yeah.
And I felt that I would rather push myself physically. I would rather run a marathon. I would rather than bungee jump. And I felt that I'd seen enough challenging stories about Bali and bungee jumping at that time. There's no more bungee jumping in Bali, by the way, to my knowledge. But back then there was a lot. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it here. What
was Bali like for you? Like what did it open your eyes to? What was it like at that time? Because this is 1998. Yeah.
Indonesia was always about the people to me. I thought there was sometimes almost too much deference to foreigners, but I felt that there was a warmth, that people had a genuine curiosity. And I like people with a curiosity.
Yeah.
And so in Indonesia, someone said to me, had a lot of nooks and crannies, meaning that there's always something fascinating to see if you got out of where you were to somewhere else. So whether it was Sulawesi and Toraja, there's enough differences within one country. And it's a country that's 5.5, 6 hours end to end. Take planes that are longer than in the US. I didn't appreciate it, a place that I never really heard of. And then when I kept going around Indonesia, there was always something unique or different. People's complexions changed, and each area was a little bit more unique than the next. Sometimes you don't know why something fascinates you.
Yeah.
But with Indonesia, it was the people.
Do you remember any person that you met that changed how you viewed Indonesia?
I think it's the totality of the people. Whether it's the guy who's coming up to you, playing his guitar on the street as you're eating some street food, or the staff that I work with here.
But it seems like you took this feeling and wanted to pursue it more, because you went from someone who hadn't really traveled to going to Japan and all over Southeast Asia. What inspired you to do the Peace Corps?
Almost to make up for lost opportunity.
Yeah.
Going back to my uncle and saying, you never learned Japanese, you should learn Japanese. When I came back, I was like, I want to learn a language. So I joined the Peace Corps.
Just to learn a language.
And because I thought, the other thing is I liked living overseas. And back then I was like, did I like living overseas or did I like living in Japan? Let me go to Europe to find out.
Yeah.
I think what I've learned is if you like something, you don't always have to explore if you're going to like something else more.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a lesson that I'm still always learning. But I went to Lithuania, and I thought I would learn Russian because I'm ignorant back then. And I didn't know they had their own real language. I just knew that they played basketball. And I figured if I was going to be somewhere, at least I knew I could play basketball. And sure enough, they played basketball. And sure enough, they really didn't want to learn. They didn't want to teach me Russian except to swear. And so I learned Lithuanian to a relatively decent degree. I could have meetings and so forth in Lithuanian. And unfortunately, Lithuanian is not a widely spoken language. It's a wonderful language, but it hasn't served me outside of Lithuania, where Japanese or something would have in a larger degree.
What was the Peace Corps at large like?
Lithuania at the time, it wasn't a standard Peace Corps place. You think of Africa or Latin America, and Lithuania was easier in terms of the physical comforts. I had a 1-bedroom apartment. I had plumbing. But where it was harder was that Lithuania is kind of an isolating place. You're out in the middle of nowhere. In Lithuania, it's cold. People aren't as warm and hospitable. So you really have a sense of isolation in a different way than you would if you were in an African hut somewhere.
What kind of problems were you trying to solve there?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. From the Peace Corps perspective?
Yeah.
Oh, we were introducing democracy, and we were showing that Americans weren't bad people.
Yeah.
I think that was the goal. And I think I achieved that.
How did you do that?
By not being a bad guy, by trying to meet people, it was hard. So I used to go play basketball and I was okay. And I would go and somehow I found out they started around 7. I get there at 6:45. We'd start shooting. I go to the bathroom, and at 7:05 they already made teams, and those teams went for the whole night. So I couldn't get in, and this would happen, like they wouldn't start, and then all of a sudden they started, and I was just not included. And this is a town like 12,000, 13,000. So they knew I was the American that was there. And then after like 2-3 months, I started to play with them. I get in there.
2-3 months.
Yes, it took a while.
So you were left out of the game for 2-3 months.
Yeah, I would go and I'd shoot around at the beginning, and then I was out. And then one night they're like, "Hey, you want to go out for beers afterwards?" And it's like, "Yeah." So I went out. We went out for beers. Turns out they go out for beers every night. They just hadn't invited me. And apparently the losers buy the winners drinks or something, or at least the American buys everyone drinks. But so I didn't even know that. So it took me like 6 months to break in. So it was a isolating experience, but warm. I feel like people say when I'm traveling, does this place feel like home? And home feels like home. But Lithuania has the comforts of home. And but it was hard to get into, because people weren't. You're in a small town where people are always there, and you're this new person coming in, and you're weird because you don't speak their language very well, and you're this awkward guy. And this question of how do you handle that kind of, for lack of a better word, adversity, And for me, it was just showing up again and trying to play. And now that town has its own basketball Hall of Fame for Lithuania, and I can go back and I'm welcomed, but that wouldn't have happened if I didn't keep showing up.
What did the end of your time in the Peace Corps look like? Like what, by the end, like, do you report that you've made this many people think that you're not a dick, or
they want to see some type of accomplishment? So I taught at a university. I taught American studies and negotiation. So you fill out a report on stuff that you did or stuff that you wanted to do. I think that was a time where I didn't see as an opportunity, that I always wondered how things would have been different, but I was happy that I didn't choose that path. So there was an opportunity to play professional basketball there.
Wait, what? Really?
Yeah.
You were really shooting around then.
I was shooting around, but what happened, what I realized was that the team was, it was a local town team, but the town teams go further down, and they had 10 people. And I would have been number 11. And my skill there was, I was 6'3" or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was free.
Yeah.
So I was a good practice dummy. So usually these teams that recruit a foreigner, and that foreigner is like the ringer. I was the guy who's been recruited, and I would have just been the guy on the bench.
Yeah.
And the reason why I didn't do it was because it was practice 6 days a week for 9 months.
Wow.
And I wanted to be able to experience Lithuania.
Yeah.
And I didn't think I would be able to do that, without that.
So now that your basketball career was on ice, where did you think about going next after the Peace Corps? Because I feel like the general path after Peace Corps is like politics and like DC and all that.
So I went to International Affairs School. I went to Tufts University. They have a school there for international affairs, but I think it was more of a reset. Yeah, so I went there with the intent of doing something in international economics.
Why?
Actually, it was international negotiations. Like I thought I was looking at the islands between the Philippines and China, and there was conflict, and I wanted to come in and help solve the conflict. But back in the Peace Corps, I just thought, like, as an American, it was interesting conflict. There's some kind of career path for me. Like I worked with Jimmy Carter, who was trying to solve conflicts. But then I realized I wanted to also. I just knew there was more for me to learn. And I felt that graduate school is a place to learn lots of different ideas.
So after graduate school, how did you end up at like the United Nations?
So that was in between graduate school. That was an internship. And that was in Indonesia again. It was fascinating because I had a little more perspective of what Indonesia was going through the first time I came here, that financial crisis. And so now I could appreciate Indonesia in a new way, in a little bit more educated way. And I started to study the language. And I really enjoyed my 8 weeks here. I've bounced around enough to know that there's a point in every time when you travel and you start in a new place where it feels like home. It just feels natural. In Washington, when I moved there after graduate school, it took me like 8 months. In New York, it took me like 6 months. In Indonesia, Jakarta, where I have no bearings, it took me like 3 weeks. Like I had friends, I had a routine. It was great. I had a girlfriend. It was like all coming together. It was an experience of being comfortable with the uncomfortable, because Indonesia is obviously not my natural home.
Yeah. And what were you doing with, like, in Indonesia? What was like the actual work like?
It was statistics. It was after graduate school going to the U.S. government. I worked in the Office of Management and Budget, which is a small office in the White House that looks at all aspects of how America spends money.
You specifically did like foreign assistance?
I was doing mostly foreign assistance. So back then it was Iraq and Afghanistan. That particular was like 2005, 2007. I was there in the office doing some other things before that. That was the place where I realized I could sit anywhere. I could sit, if I was 32, so I was young. Most people at the table were 45 or 50. But then I realized, when I walked into a room, I don't have to sit in the back. If I have something to say, like take a seat at the table, literally take a seat at the table. And then your voice is just as loud as a Secretary of State who's sitting across.
Wow. Did you feel like you were making a difference there?
I feel like I was learning how people make decisions with very little information. And at the margins, I think I had an impact. At one point, I used to work at I used to deal with offshore drilling. And so making sure the U.S. government could receive money because it owns the land. It's not private land. And so my role was to ensure that the government got fair value for the resources. And there was a rule that they were creating which allowed for incentives for companies to be able to drill. I put in a clause to be able to reduce that incentive over time, because it's like we have an incentive to do it, but after the incentive goes away, there's no reason to keep paying people. It sounds like a small detail, and it probably is. It saves the government tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. So those types of experiences, I was able to help on the margins, especially in an administration that was really excited to develop energy in the U.S.
So you were doing like statistics work but like management of money work. How did that parlay into Lehman's?
I was going into Colombia during the narcotics. I did a lot of anti-narcotic stuff. So I remember was in Peru, and we were physically going in the jungles, looking out the window, that was in a
Ford Black
Hawk helicopter with a Peruvian guy with the black shades and the helmet. And there's this gun bigger than my arm with bullets that are the size of my finger. And we're going into the counter narcotics area.
Wow.
We're giving tens of millions of dollars to these people. How are they spending it? I went into where they were eradicating. They were actually pulling out by hand. Then we went to the base. I was at this event. One of the soldiers, I believe he lost an arm. He lost it in a drug war that we were supporting. I didn't know what we were at, but it was some kind of ceremony. And I realized when I'm at a ceremony that I'm not David. I'm the representative of the U.S. government. And in this case, the White House for this guy. He was emotionally taken by the fact that I was out there, so that his loss of arm wasn't in vain. The White House gave me the sense of that it's not you, it's the role. It's not you, it's the symbolism. And because I was a 32-year-old guy who I just learned Lithuanian a year before, but I had to take the role seriously. Taking the role seriously, understanding what very powerful people make decisions on very little information. Because I was conveying information. My main goal was to take ridiculous amounts of information and synthesize them to very small bite-sized pieces of information so that someone can make a decision between three different options. That's how we make decisions on whether we help people in rural Pennsylvania with black lung disease, or whether we're spending more money on counter narcotics operations. And then you have to add in all the politics. And I wasn't a political person. So I could just say, this is what I think is in the best interest of the American people. And then here's my decision. You decide what you're going to do. And then I'll go, even if it's against what I do, I'll just go out and this is our policy.
Did you feel a sense of purpose?
Yes. Walking into that White House and walking into the Situation Room, you had a sense of real power. Walking into the Situation Room, every time I was there, I was like, I wasn't speaking, but I was there.
You're hearing some of the most important decisions get made.
And how they make them. And at 32, for me, it was inspiring. And hey, there was a career path. But a lot of other 32-year-olds were having the same experience in Washington. But it was my experience. And it felt unique to me.
Why did you leave?
Because I didn't own anything. I got to be in cool meetings. But if I stayed in government, I felt 30 years later, I would still be in cool meetings, but nothing was mine.
What do you mean nothing was yours?
So all those people in the State Department, that meeting, owned their issue. It was a small issue. They might have been working on Laos. They might have been working on trafficking persons in Thailand. And then when they grew up in their career, they would be the ones sitting at the table. And I would still be at the side at the margins talking about, oh, how much budget could you have? But they knew the issue was their issue. It was almost like their business. And I was always just on the sideline. And I felt like the budget is something that's really critical. I didn't own the budget. I managed someone else's budget. And then I got a cubicle that didn't look out a window in the middle of 49th Street, but I was on Wall Street.
Yeah. So how did you make the transition there? Because like this is going from, it seems something super purposeful. You know, you're part of something bigger, that you're actually feeling that you're making a difference. You're going to these places representing America. You have a seat at the table where you're making decisions or helping make decisions that matter. Can you tell me like the moment that you decide to leave?
It was the fact that I didn't own something. Like it felt like I wasn't going to be, I didn't want to become a budget person. And I didn't see myself going into into Congress and working with a member of Congress.
Was it difficult to quit?
It wasn't. It was, I had applied to grad school because I thought I'd go to get an MBA again, because I thought that would kind of clear the past and then I could do something different. But then I got into Lehman Brothers. So like I was, well, I can go get an MBA because I got into grad school again, or I can go to Lehman Brothers. But after an MBA, I'd want to go to Lehman Brothers anyway.
What was your 5-year plan?
To be at Lehman Brothers for 5 years. That was really the plan. I was in this small division with the former deputy director of the CIA, Jamie Missick. So it's this small cadre of people, there were 5 of us, that was providing geopolitical advice for Lehman Brothers because they were worried about the risk of going into emerging markets, because that was risky. You know, what's happening here in the company? And I started to get a good understanding of, hey, you know, my role was to give advice, but ultimately the bank wanted to make deals. So, you know, it was like, how much could I say no without getting pushback or give a sense of what risk was? But again, I wasn't owning anything. I was stopping something at best. So I quickly understood that, oh, I'm kind of in the same game as I was before. And how do I navigate through that? So I was about a year and a third in. And then the financial crisis happened.
What was that like while you were there? Do you remember anything like on the news about the stock market, or are there any moments that stand out?
Things were going down, and people were getting pessimistic that the markets aren't going our way. But we always felt that even coming into September, so the bank failed September 15th or 14th, we always felt that the Fed was there, that someone was going to save us, that we were too big to fail. And then all of a sudden, you know, September 14th happened. And that was when we realized that no one was saving us. And people started saying goodbye notices before they felt like we're going to get cut off. No one knew what was going to happen. I mean, we're this big. We didn't know what the human resource department was going to be like. Who hands out pink slips when the company's not existent? I went to work the next day. A lot of traders did not. They did go to a bar. They just did other things. They were probably smart, but we felt that we would just continue doing what we were doing until we were told otherwise. It was also coincidentally the same day I had just tried to start my writing career. I was never a very good writer. And it was the day that my first opinion piece got in the New York Times. So the written section, you know, not too much online that day. So, yeah, my company went out of business. It was a beautiful, you know, dare I say, a 9/11 type, beautiful, clear sky in New York type day. You know, I walked to work from Brooklyn. It was a long walk. I was kind of happy.
Really? You were happy that the whole company went up and the economy went up in flames?
I wasn't happy I lost my job. I was going into uncertainty. I was happy I accomplished a goal of mine. I got in, and I remember the New York Times, they emailed me 2 hours after I submitted my piece. It took them another 6-8 weeks or 3 months to get it in print. I was happy that I was in the New York Times, and very, very disappointed that Lehman Brothers was failing, and I didn't know what I would do for a job.
When did you get fired?
It wasn't right away, but it took about 2 months. And they moved it. It was like late October. Nothing had been cleaned since like September 18th, because you went to the printer and you turned over the copy, and there was something there from September 18th, and something on someone's desk was there. They just left.
Wow.
And so it was dusty.
Ghost town.
And it was ghost town. It takes a while to fire people. So I think we were let go at the end of October. I felt like, wow, I'm competing against a lot of people for a job where I haven't been around long enough to have a lot of skills. So I did what everyone else did. I tried to network a job, and it was at the same time, 2 days later, that I broke my heel from playing basketball. So there I am in slushy New York in October, November on crutches, going to interviews.
Oh man, life isn't looking too good right now.
But the guy was like, "Hey, you really want the job?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And I was lucky to network into a job.
What was the next job you got?
It was an analyst. It was something I was completely unprepared for. It was a credit analyst. So I worked at an energy trading company. So I was to look at companies' balance sheets and cash flow and predict, are they able to pay if we trade with them on energy? And I thought, okay, well, they'll teach me. They did not teach me. Third day, I went to a meeting and they were all sitting around yelling out company names, and then someone would say what their opinion was. And then they said a small name to me and no one's answering. And then I realized, oh, that's me. And so I had to say something intelligent about a company that I had just been analyzing. And I didn't know what to say. So I said a few sentences about why I thought their cash flow was strong. No one said anything. And then they moved on. And I realized I was in the game. No one was going to congratulate me for doing that. But I realized that I had just passed the test.
Did you feel like you had a sense of purpose there?
I don't know if back then if anyone in energy trading felt they had a sense of purpose. It was a place that people made a lot of money.
We'll get back to the podcast right after this break. It's October, and that means you're probably in the final stretch of your fiscal year. And in this macroeconomic climate, you're also probably thinking about how to best optimize budgets and scale operations in 2023. But you don't want the best probable solution to deal with whatever comes next. You want the best solution, period. Whatever stage your business is in, HubSpot's CRM platform is ready to scale with you at the flip of a metaphorical switch. With totally customizable hubs, HubSpot has thousands of apps that you can easily integrate, use, or get rid of whenever you need them or don't. Plus, transparent costs and an intuitive interface that means there are no fancy frills for us to hide behind. That's because HubSpot isn't here to probably grow your business. It's here to help you grow your business, period. Learn how HubSpot can help your business grow better at HubSpot.com. And now, back to the podcast. Do you feel like things are stabilizing on the work side? So did you invest more time into your writing?
So I started to do more writing. It was a time where my friend, my graduate school roommate, he started a nonprofit called Clearwater Initiative. Basically, he was in Uganda in 2004, 5, 6. And they were emerging out of a civil war. And there's a small role in the army where it actually does rebuilding. And he was building bridges and water wells and was taken by the people. And he came back to the US and wanted to continue his military work. And so he started to raise money and send it out to people in Uganda. I started to get into that in that I poorly led a fundraiser or something, or party in New York. And when he was called up to serve in Afghanistan, he said, David, can you keep an eye on the organization for a year while I'm serving?
What did that look like to keep an eye on the organization?
To me, it was probably like hold a fundraiser, maybe 2, make sure money that was going to Uganda actually went to the right bank account, and then get some reports back and some pictures. And Ben, he talked to me at one point and said, I don't have to go in to do this. And I said, well, then why are you? He said, well, my guys are going. So if my guys are going, I'm going to go, because he had met his service by going to Uganda. And I didn't realize that the service that he was in really brought him out to, like, he was on the tip of the spear. He was
like very much on the front lines.
Exactly. I got a call on October 2nd. It was a Friday night from his fiance. And I got a missed call. And I looked at it, and it was peculiar because of the time I got it. And my mom was in town at my sister's house. I was actually down in Washington. And I said, I got to take this call. I don't think I'm going to like it. Something's not right. And that's when she told me he was killed.
What had happened?
He was in a suicide attack. Later, we learned that he was going around one side of a building, someone else going around the other side of the building, and then he was on the wrong side. So some type of suicide attack. And at that point, in relation to Clearwater, the business or the NGO got a lot more attention. I mean, this brilliant man who happened to be my friend started this organization. People wanted to honor him, honor the idea of him. And we went back to Connecticut, and we were in the funeral, and people were lining the streets.
Wow.
If you've never drawn along a roadway where there are people waving at you or supporting you in some way, it's a very strange feeling. It was miles and miles of this, well beyond miles and miles of it. Towns getting out, high schools getting out, just to kind of honor him. And so in that honoring of him, his organization got more attention. So more money came in.
How much money came in?
Several $100,000.
Wow. From 30,000 to several $100,000. How did it feel? Because you're the one managing the organization. How did that feel for you?
And so everyone wanted to keep his legacy growing, but there was pains to it. There was pains for all of us. For me, I wanted to go out there and set the organization right. I wanted it to do what it was supposed to do, but do it in the right way. Too often foreign assistance is about giving people money and the veil of doing something right. And I wanted to do something right. And so with the job, I used to take calls on about Uganda by going into the closet at the energy trading company and talk to people in Uganda, and then come back and come to work. And then I went out to Uganda for 6 weeks, taking some time off to set up the organization on the ground, because we were above just sending money out there, and we wanted a presence because we wanted to make sure we were doing right. And it was important to me personally for multiple reasons that it live on in some way to honor, that a dream didn't have to die with a dreamer. And so he was the first person that I really lost at a young age. Yeah. So I balanced the energy trading company and Clearwater.
Did you feel like you could strike that balance forever, or did you feel at one point you had to decide?
Well, at Clearwater, it wasn't my passion. It's not like I had to find my passion, but I knew it was something that I wouldn't enjoy doing for a long period of time. And then I tried very briefly to start up an investment advisory company for, a couple months. That didn't work out with some other people who ended up taking that somewhere else. And then I ended up off in Japan.
And you went to Japan with?
The Council on Foreign Relations. I was based in their Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. So I was in the Japanese government. It was a great fellowship.
Why did you apply?
Because I felt like I had unsettled business with Japan. I've always enjoyed it, but I never learned the language. I felt that there was more there. So I had applied, I got in, I went out there. I had an office at Tokyo University. I had an office at the Ministry of Economy and Trade and Industry, and no one had any expectations that I could produce. And nor did I have a timeline to do anything. And it was a year. And so basically, what do I want to do for a year? So I tried to write.
What about what you were doing at the time wasn't exactly what you wanted? Why did you feel like you needed this year? Why did you actually apply? Because it's you could do whatever you want to do, but was there something missing that you wanted to do in Japan?
So I was working in credit risk. I was working at a Sempra or RBS, a bank. And I found analyzing balance sheets is fascinating, and cash flow statements. You see the story of a company in numbers, but that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to analyze cash flow statements. Yeah. The salary was good, but I was a temporary hire, but I was paid as a full timer. And so I could have parlayed that into something, but I knew that when I tend to look at careers, when I'm looking back at the White House, I saw the career path that I was going to go on. It was a budget officer. I didn't want to do that. I was in this one because Lehman fell and I needed a place. I found a home. It was good money, but I didn't want to continue in that role. I wanted something different. And this fellowship seemed like an opportunity where I could step back and do a little bit of writing. I could continue the Clearwater aspect because Clearwater wasn't going to pay me, in any significant way. And so I went out to Japan. I said, I'll manage Clearwater. I'll try and figure out if I can write a book.
So that's what that was the goal. I want to see if I can write a book.
Yeah, because I was a terrible writer. I was horrible. I had ideas, but I couldn't turn them into anything. And a professor of mine said, David, your writing's not very good. And he said, read The Economist and it'll get better. And so I tried to read things and learn how to write, but I'm a technical writer. I like to see how sentences are broken up. I like to see how I use a colon or a semicolon or a dash. So I was looking at The Economist. How do they write? How do I write like that? And then so this time away, when I was with the fellowship, I could manage the Clearwater and then practice writing.
What did you want to write about?
Water. I wanted, because I was expert in water. And then I wanted to write about numbers because I was fascinated with numbers, because everywhere you travel in the world, you can use a calculator and people understand what 1, 2, 3, 4. But numbers translate in a way words do not. And so I was like, I was going to write about numbers, and because I worked at the budget, and I would talk about billions of dollars, and that has no meaning. But if I were to talk about $20 that you're going to spend on a salad, you're going to say, wow, that's expensive. So what do numbers mean? And I was really excited to do that. And then China and Japan got in a little skirmish over some islands, and these commodities that China supplied Japan with became a top news. And as I was in Japan and I was doing something in international affairs, this was 2010, that my friend at The Economist magazine was out there, was like, hey, what are these metals? And as someone in commodities, I wanted to sound intelligent. So then I said, what are these commodities? And so because they were so important to our lifestyle in ways that we did not appreciate, just like yeast is critical for pizza. You know, if you don't have yeast, you don't have bread, you don't have pizza. But it's such a small amount of stuff, but yet they have outsized impact. So I was curious about the ingredients of our lives. And so as my fellowship started, this issue came to the fore and I became fascinated with it. So that's when I was realizing, okay, this is something that I want to write about. And usually smart people then say, hey, I have a fellowship for a year. Maybe I should start thinking about writing a book. I waited till the fellowship ended and then said, hey, maybe I can make a proposal that could turn into a book.
But you were still writing during that time.
So I was writing. So during that time, so I started to learn Japanese in, I guess, the beginning of the 3 months after I went in, I started to learn Japanese. And then 3/11 happened. That was the earthquake. And I was in their Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry when it happened.
Wow.
The center of which turned out to be the emergency response. And that interrupted my learning because I ended up leaving the country.
Can you tell me what that day was like?
So I was in the building and it started shaking. So back and forth. And it was a lot more than I was used to. And then people, like including myself, we got under the desk. And I didn't know what was supposed to happen. And I remember looking out from the desk and seeing some guy still at his computer trying to hold the mouse, and he's shaking back and forth. And it's, he's not managing to do much work, and I don't know why he's still there. And then the building starts to squeak. And I had known at that time, the building was built on a foundation that could shift.
Yeah.
So you could see shock absorber. You could see shock. Yeah. So there was that. And the building started squeaking. And I remember thinking to myself, what does it feel like to be in a building before it collapses? And is this it? Because at some point, a building has to get so much stress that it's just got to go. Yeah. And I didn't know if this building could handle it. Turns out the buildings can handle a lot, but it was shaky. And after the earthquake, which was a little over a minute and a half, it was long. And it felt longer being there. And people got up and kind of, they were shocked and they were shaken, but they kind of went about their day. We went upstairs and we looked out, and there was an oil refinery fire across the way that you could see, black smoke coming up. And I feel like this isn't normal. I said, guys, what do we do? Like, I felt like I had to do something. They didn't say anything. They didn't have an answer. It wasn't like stay here or go out. It was just nothing. Then the next quake happened 15, 20 minutes later. And it wasn't as large as the first one, but it was closer to Tokyo. So it felt just as strong. After that one, which was also long, I said, I'm out of here. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I got to be doing something. And it doesn't feel like I had to stay here. And I got out into the street, and it was like, an ant's nest had been shaken, and everyone's just wandering around because I think everyone didn't know exactly where to go. So I walked home, but my experience there was quite isolating because I went back to my house and the earth was still shaking. It was still rocking. And, I went home and I started to write. I wrote a piece in about, an hour and a half and submitted it to the New York Times, and they accepted it right away. And again,
what did it feel like to get that again?
It felt like a nice accomplishment for me. And actually, when I look back at the piece, there's lines that you sometimes write and you're like, oh, that one cringed. But overall, that piece feels very meaningful to me.
It's interesting, like how close your wins are to disaster.
But not my disaster. I mean,
I know, but what it feels like more is almost like within disaster, you see opportunity.
You see clarity. I think within disaster or emergencies, there's clarity. And if you can kind of slow down and see your own matrix, then maybe there's a way out.
How you channel clarity, I think, is also interesting. Like the first thing you did was write.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it feels like something you were called to do in the moment.
I find that writing is that. So I've learned in my career of writing or analyzing things that the moment chooses you, that you don't choose the moment. The earthquake, at that time I was there. And if you're at get to the table, be at the table and you have a voice. I was at the center of what was happening and I could, report on that or I could speak on that. And then how do you get the clarity to do that? I think is the key. And maybe I had practice being in weird places. Yeah.
It seems like you did.
Yeah. And wanting to write.
Did you see it as an art form?
Writing?
Yeah.
Of course.
Did it feel like your art form?
It still does. But I haven't written in years. It's the editing that makes something great. It's not the writing. Like what people often just want to write and it's done. I find joy in the shaving of words, in the slicing of thoughts to boil it down to its essence. And yeah, can you write, get it out, and then go back and get a little distance and then get clarity again? And it's that clarity of thought that makes writing good, not always just the prose itself and how brief you can make it. Like I love looking at comedians, Jerry Seinfeld, Gary Goldman, how they try and make something so precise and each word has real meaning. And I think in that moments of clarity and pain, whatever people may have, they write better.
I do want to talk a little bit more about when you decided to start a process of writing a book, because you said you had a little bit of an idea about it during the fellowship,
and then it ended, and I was like, all right, so what am I doing now? As it was ending, and I've always wanted to write the book, and so I wrote a proposal, and in the back of my mind, I get a minimum of X to write the book. I'll write the book. If I don't get a minimum of X, then I won't write the book. I literally got that minimum of X, and just that bare minimum, and I said, well, I'll write the book. And that was back in 2011, 2012, whenever I signed the contract. There was less self-published. There was self-publishing was starting, but it seemed like if you were going to kind of make it, whatever that meant, or get the book out there, that you needed to be with a publisher. So I got it accepted right as kind of the fellowship was ending and said, all right, I'm going to do this because I'm at a point in my career where there's a natural gap and I want to prove I can do this.
So how did you start writing it? Where did you go? Like what was your process?
I traveled and wrote because I wanted to know the supply lines of material flows from mountain towns in Brazil to refineries in Estonia to factories in China. So when I walked into, just remember in China in the summer, it was extremely hot, humid, 90s, and walking into the factories where they were smaller than a high school gym and with a lofted roof, where guys were wearing flip-flops and ripped shirts. They had cauldrons, 7 or 8 cauldrons of bubbling liquid, which were becoming metals, which start to enter into our, into our computers somehow. And this was kind of the heart of where stuff was being made. And I remember looking and my eyes were burning from being there. And I turned to my colleague and I said, should my eyes be burning here? And he said, yes, because there's a lot of fluorine in the air. And so those moments become crystallized. And how do I slow down the moment and then write about it? It's like one of the things that I mentally practiced when I was starting to write was like, what if I took a mental image of a picture, how would I explain it? And when I started writing, I would try and overwrite and explain all of the details in the room. But when you start to explain everything, you explain nothing. And so as a story creator, as you probably know very well, you have to pick the elements that are most important. Is it the fact that my microphone is red and yours is blue? Probably not. But is it the way I'm sitting in the chair or something like that that might tell a story about who I am? So how do we all look at the same picture and are we able to pull out the relevant details? And some people are very, very good at that. And that's one thing I'm trying to learn more about in my writing.
As you got towards the end of writing that book, how did it feel?
It was, I had never read books that much. So I didn't know how they all came together, to be honest. So I didn't.
What do you mean you had never read books that much?
No, because my attention wasn't so long. I wouldn't finish books or I wouldn't. And so I didn't know exactly how all the book came together. And how did that created a challenge. Like what's the intro and then and then I think the other thing, maybe going back to your friend, is that you don't know what your book is about. So my friend Kenny's a writer, has written many numerous books, and he said to me, sometimes you don't know what your book is about until you're about halfway through it. And then you start to find the thread. And you're like, oh, that's what the book is about. And I found that. And so much so that the last piece of the book that I wrote was the first few sentences.
Wow.
It was the opening. I couldn't figure out how to open the book, and I couldn't figure it out until the end.
Yeah.
And that was the last thing. Everything else was set. Just how does the book open up?
And so you finished that book. How does it do? And also, how are you thinking about how you like actually created it? Because you were jumping from like reflecting on that experience. Like you're jumping from probably like internet cafe to write this thing. You finish it and you have a product, but like, how are you thinking about the actual product you finished? But also, were you thinking about creating a second book? Were you thinking about how you could better the experience of writing it for yourself or for others? Like, how are you thinking about the outcome going forward?
I think I take a step back. When you're writing the book, people don't necessarily believe you. And they say, you're writing a book. Is it like a book? Yeah, I'm writing a book. Maybe now this is changing because more people are writing. And I would say, well, how did you start doing it? I said I had an agent. I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe this guy's serious. Can I buy it like in a bookstore? I'm like, yes, it's a book. And people didn't dawn on it. And then you get through the whole book process and then you're finally done. And it's a long labor to try and get it to where you want it. The book itself had 75 pages of footnotes. So it's a long researched book, and I'm done and I'm tired. And people are like, oh, you wrote a book. When's your next one? And you're like, I just had enough of it. I don't want to write. And that's the way I felt for a while. It's like, I didn't want to write. I enjoyed that when people would tell me that it helped influence their career, or when people in the industry would say they learned something from it. Because I had just been in the industry for 2-3 years and I was learning, but I wasn't afraid to ask stupid questions. And what I realized in writing the book and why I was well positioned, because I could speak the language of a finance guy. I could talk about projects and he would speak to me directly as a finance guy. I could talk to the NGO guy about...
You had all the pieces.
Yeah. And he could talk to me in his work. That they could speak to me in their own language. Even though it was all English, they could speak to me in their own language. And so my job was to translate for the reader and say, all of these things are happening. How do you make sense of this as a reader? So my job was, I looked at it as the translator, and I felt very accomplished that I was able to take a subject that was so big and make it so that a friend of mine said to me, wow, this book is actually interesting.
But you also said you were kind of booked out and you didn't necessarily want to jump into writing something else right after.
No, it's not a lucrative career.
So what did you want to do?
I wanted to stay, at that point, I'd stay a little bit more in the metals business. But at that point, I had already looked at the next step. So I had been traveling and writing from cafes and increasingly seeing more people working in cafes. I remember sitting in Tokyo and I was doing a bit of writing and looked around, and a lot of other people were on their laptop typing away. This was 2012, 13. And I wondered why they weren't in the office. And then wait, if they weren't in the office and they were working at a coffee shop, why did they even have to be in Tokyo at all? And why couldn't they be an amazing place? And I had started doing a lot of my writing for the book in Bali and said, hey, this would be a great place for people who are increasingly being able to work from anywhere. And then as that was happening, I said, well, why don't I see if we can find a place out here in Bali between when the book was done being written. There's about 9 months in the US, or historically, because they wanted to build up the press for the book, but publishers don't do that much in that way at the moment. Between when the book was coming out, so there's 9 months, and I wanted to open up this space that we're currently at Outpost in Bali to open it up so that when my book came out, I could kind of go back to the metals business, and never went back to the metals business fully. Although I did do a bunch of work in 2017, 18, 19, it was always on the side.
You have a name for it at the time? Like, what did you want this thing to be?
The working name was One. And the reason why I called it One was because I figure one was so basic and accessible to anyone in the world. And just like I was talking about those numbers previously, that everyone knew what one was. And then I realized, well, we were the space on the cusp of where society, where Western or American, because I'm biased, because I come from there, the cusp of the world is Bali for them, so we're the space where they can get everything that they need. And so when you're out here and you're remote working, what do you need? Obviously you need a place to work, you need a place to put your head, but you're going through tremendous experiences, and you really want to do that with other people. And so the longer that you're out here, the more importance, or the longer you're anywhere, the more importance that physical connection with people is important. So we set up Outpost for that specific purpose, to support those people. And you kind of have to do that from the ground up. It's easy to find a coffee shop with good coffee or an office, but in order to support the lifestyle, there's got to be more in place. They chose Bali for a reason. They could go to any other island in Indonesia where there's an office.
Was there any point or any person that you interact with where you're like, oh, I think I've created what I like, the beginnings of the vision that I initially had?
Most fascinating experience, I think, was the first customer from Lithuania, small country of 3 million people where I served Peace Corps. The first person who came to Outpost was Lithuanian. And I said, there's some kind of connection there. I think when I was on the BTS in Bangkok, someone stopped my partner and I said, hey, this was 2017. You guys are the Outpost guys. I'm like, yeah, I guess we are. So that was when the sense of, all right, our people are traveling and moving. And then this year I was Marriott. Someone came up and said hello. I'm like, hey, I know you. He's like, yeah, you're the Outpost guy. I'm like, yeah. Okay. And to see that the people are traveling and that was a formative experience. And that were, the people who stay here are all kinds of, ages 20 to 45 or 50. And they're all kinds of income brackets, and that we're supporting their lifestyle, and they're still going around traveling and working, at least for part of their life.
So you raised like 1.3 million in 2019 for it, right? You've opened up somewhere like a place in Sri Lanka recently. Where is Outpost today? Like, what do you feel like a thing that has happened or experience you've had with it or someone else has had that you feel like this symbolizes where things stand today and also maybe where things are going?
I look back at our deck when we were raising in 2019 and 2020, and I had to explain to people what remote work was, that people were doing it and the market was big, and that when people do travel, their main challenge is loneliness, and that we were the supporting remote workers with the ability to work and have friends. And that was a lot. So it was a challenge. And you have physical spaces. I think what excites me about Outpost, and I don't know if this is exactly the question, is I think we're coming to a world where people are coming out of the pandemic and they've changed. They're more reclusive. They feel that withdrawn and there aren't places that people can meet anymore, and they don't know how to meet people. And I know these are broad generalizations, but in a society we've lost, at least I go back to the West, we don't have town squares anymore with people meeting up and saying, hear ye, this is what we're going to pass, or the town bars aren't there. Political parties are isolated, but they're picking up from where religion is left off because people aren't going to church or synagogue or to mosques as much. And now we've entered into a time where we're like, hey, let's do remote work where we can be isolated to do whatever it is that we want to do. And I think what we're finding is that while remote work can be empowering for many people, that we're withdrawing even further from a joint sense of meaning. And so where Outpost comes in is it becomes a place where people are impressionable and willing to meet with others and to share ideas. And I think there's a role to play for a place like Outpost, although we're doing it on the cusp. And I feel rewarded personally when people meet each other and also then go out and do something, then go out and experience Bali, or then go out and experience Lombok or Sulawesi or somewhere, something that they wouldn't have done if they were just traveling by themselves. And that I feel it's when it's rewarding, not that someone is able to write better copy because they're in the office space.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at Finding Founders Podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Finding Founders is produced and hosted by me, Samuel Donner.
Our audio editing team lead is Ashley Jimenez, with support from
Jessica Morales, Miley Lipton,
Siyu Pan,
Kenny Wright,
Josie Yo,
Matt Fernandez,
and Merritt Hill.
Our outreach and research team lead is Desiree Nunez, with support from
Marissa Granados,
Monica Lee,
Sarah Tiersma,
and Yao Liu.
To see more of what we're up to, subscribe to our newsletter at findingfounders.co. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.